Tonight, live, just 4 months shy of the 50th anniversary of the last moon rocket launch, NASA gears up to make history as the uncrewed Artemis I sits primed and ready on launch pad 39B. We've got every second of launch coverage with the usual Trekzone flair. Sit back and enjoy the ride.
This is Trekzone's Talkin' Science.
Welcome to this special edition of Talkin' Science. We are just under 20 minutes from the opening of the 2-hour launch window for Artemis I. She is looking very pretty on the launch pad. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Trekzone's coverage. Matt Miller with you. We do have some unplanned news at this stage. We are in an unplanned T-minus 40-minute hold as some situations develop with the fueling of the rocket, the Space Launch System rocket, on the launch pad. We can bring you in that live shot happening right now on NASA's media channel. I'm very excited to be able to bring that to you live here on Trekzone, and we're going to gather some information and work out exactly what is happening. I am hearing that it is very possible that we are scrubbing even today's launch, which out of the abundance of caution is what you want in terms of powering through with the world coverage of this mission and the continuation of our exploration of the moon. Not necessarily what we want to have. And that Space Launch System stacked and ready for launch from Pad 39B. That's next door to Pad 39A, where Apollo 17 lifted off for the last trip to the moon in a human-rated spacecraft just under 50 years ago. Over the coming couple of hours, sit back and relax. The Trekzone-flavoured coverage, if we can get there. We will bring you the launch live if it happens, plus take you through the Talkin' Science archive with Dr. Brad and I talking about the progress of Artemis through the months since I expanded Trekzone to feature more than just Star Trek back in 2019. Dr. Brad will also beam in for a special chat about tonight's launch, hopefully launch, and Glenn Nagel from the Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex will run us through the expectations on the Deep Space Network to keep Artemis in contact with mission control. Guy in the know, Dr. Brad Tucker. Brad, welcome to a historic night in human spaceflight.
Yeah, how's it going?
Really good, my friend, really good. This is an exciting evening for us here in Australia, around the world as well. We're finally getting back to the moon.
It's an interesting topic because everyone's always been asking for decades, when are we going back? Are we going back? You know, why did we stop going back? And they're all relevant questions. I think what's exciting is, you know, it's kind of tonight, right? Tonight is the start of when we're going back. And I think there's valid reasons for why we stopped going to the moon. And in some ways, it's good because it's helped focus the efforts on why getting back to the moon with the Artemis missions is important. What are the goals? What are the outcomes? In something that wasn't really there in the Apollo days, because the just goal was the moon. And what do you do after you get to the moon? Well, no one really knew, right? I mean, genuinely, it was kind of like, all right, well, I guess we did it. We're done. I mean, but it was important because that was also public sentiment, right? You know, the public sentiment just crashed after Apollo 11. You know, yes, everyone was super excited by Apollo 11, and then Apollo 12, Apollo 13, obviously, because of disaster, recaptured people at a different interest. But I think also with oh, wow, you know, it's actually still dangerous and complicated. Why are they even going there to the moon? I think that kind of really caused the general perception to plummet, leading to why should we keep going when there wasn't any that real reason there to keep going.
An interesting time. We'll talk to Glenn Nagel in a second from Tidbinbilla. Turns out, as I discovered, they are going to be the prime receiving station for the first acquisition of signal from Artemis I. That is very exciting. That is continuing our best traditions of the Apollo era. They've got a 15-minute window. Apparently, they're going to have to do what they did in the movie The Dish. They're going to have to drop that dish to the concrete car park below to grab the signal of Artemis. They've got 15 minutes, as I said. So very exciting. Australia is part of it. These Artemis Accords, we've talked about this across Talk and Science over the years. Plenty of involvement, not just from America this time around.
Yeah, and this is kind of the other cool thing on this mission, on the whole Artemis mission, is from the outset, it's been this coalition of countries, so to speak, and this collaboration. Artemis II, it already looks like there's going to be a Canadian astronaut on Artemis II. There's been talks of a Japanese astronaut going on Artemis 3 or 4 or 5, and other countries, European astronauts. Artemis 3 having both the first woman astronaut to land on the moon and first person of color to land on the moon. So it's a very different game than the 60s and 70s when there was 18 white American males who went up, 12 who walked on the moon, 6 who got left behind, so to speak. And that was it, right? And so I think this is kind of why it's exciting, because it's representative also of where space is, in that it's also so many different private companies have been involved in different components of this for a long time and going into the future development. So I think it's a really exciting world, the Artemis is, that it's not just, hey, we're duplicating what we did in the Apollo era. No, we're doing something dramatically different than we did in the Apollo era. The only similarity is it's the moon.
Exactly right. And we're staying this time as well. So building that presence up there and researching all of that as well. Launch sites for Artemis 3 being talked about now in the southern, towards the southern pole. So we're not going to land on the moon just yet. But, there's the few stages there, but we certainly have less missions to get there than we did in the early era as well. So that's exciting. Artemis I, uncrewed around the moon and back again in just over 40 days. Artemis II with crew, once again, around the moon and back again. Artemis III landing. This is where it all starts. Brad, very, very exciting stuff. What are you most looking forward to from these missions?
Well, yeah, look, so, as you said, firstly, I think it's important, right? We're only doing 3 missions until we land on the moon as opposed to 11. And it just goes to show how much we did learn from the Apollo era. We kind of know where are the key points, what you can test and not test together and that sort of thing. The Saturn V wasn't used for all of those as well. In fact, Apollo 1 never even left the ground. It was also the one that they had the tragedy of the 3 astronauts dying. So there's a lot of those lessons learned that have carried over. I've never been excited by the rocket. That's not the right way of saying it. I love the rocket. The rocket's key here. But it's actually been the quiet success of the Apollo missions. And when I think of the Artemis missions, is the science behind. So we learned so much about the moon by landing on the moon, taking samples, putting the laser reflector plate so we can measure distances to the moon, the seismometers on the moon. All of this stuff transformed our literal knowledge of how the moon formed, existed, its composition, and the history of the Earth. Very few of the missions, you could say, transformed our knowledge of the history of the Earth. Apollo did that. Now, you're not going to get the budgets you do to just land and do these science cases, but this is where it's different. The Artemis missions are coming in so much cheaper. A lot of people think, we're spending a lot of money on it, and yes, but the Apollo program costs $170 billion US in today dollars. That is an astounding amount of money. Artemis is a fraction of that. And now, because of how cheap the costs are of getting to the moon, the Orion capsule, they can carry more cargo to the moon. They can carry about 40 tons worth of stuff to the moon. Now there's all these possibilities that people are openly exploring of how do we send more scientific experiments to the moon. We have a proposed UV telescope to go land on the moon for Artemis 2 or 3, and potentially on one of the rovers or just on the surface, because it's like, hey, we can carry so much stuff. What else can you add on? It's cool because all of that little stuff is going to add up to be a lot of big stuff. And something that you couldn't do in the Apollo days because of the weight limits and the technology limits and the characteristics. Now it's like, hey, throw it on. We got room. And this is so cool because there's so many different areas that are going to benefit there's long been this dream that astronomers would love to put a radio telescope on the far side of the moon. And this is because the far side of the moon is the quietest place in the solar system, because the loudest place is us, are transmitting our radio waves and frequencies. And it's always been this dream to say, hey, if we could put a telescope on the far side of the moon, it would be the best thing ever. But everyone's like, well, that's never going to happen. And now everyone's like, well, maybe, and it may be cheaper than doing some of this on the Earth. This is the dramatic change we've seen now. And doing anything on the moon is easier than doing on a satellite. A satellite, when you build a telescope or whatever it may be, you have to build the satellite and all of those complicated components, something that's moving around continuously. The moon, it's just another object. You just land it and stand and point. It actually becomes so much simpler. Simpler becomes cheaper. Cheaper becomes more. And so this is what I'm really looking forward to about what the Artemis missions will bring, is all that other stuff that maybe wasn't as high on the list in the Apollo days, but is actually the legacy in the scientific world of the Apollo missions.
Certainly, very interesting stuff in the pipeline, and stuff coming up as well. And having that human presence on the surface and staying there. These facilities, as you say, they're not pipe rooms anymore, and they can be staffed as well. So again, not just remote observations, but they are, going to be staffed. They can be fixed if things break down as well. So definitely, very high value for money in all of these research items that we're going to be looking at.
Well, and that's one of the key points I didn't say. You're right. With the fixing thing, one of the reasons the Hubble kept going was they kept sending a space shuttle to fix it. That's why the Hubble Space Telescope, over 30 years old, is still kicking stars and monitoring black holes. And it's not going away anytime soon. Yes, there's a limited lifetime now that we can't service it. So if we're going to start putting stuff on the moon, it's cheaper. It could be serviced by rounds of astronauts. You could update it. You can update equipment. Imagine something like the Hubble Space Telescope on the moon. Well, you know what? It's actually going to be a lot cheaper than on a satellite. Like, all of these things just change the name of the game. And as you said, that fixing it is actually a really big thing. They're complicated machines. How often do you have to fix your phone or your computer or something like that? It's really hard when there's no one around to do it. It's a lot easier if there is someone who can do that. And that's why a lot of experiments have been on the International Space Station, right? Because there was astronauts who can operate it, run it, do the data, do the measurements. And now you can do that on the moon with the Artemis. And so this becomes the exciting world that we can now think about.
My only concern is that we find a grey obelisk sitting in the earth of the moon, the dirt, and things might eventuate a little bit further on from there. We haven't been to the dark side of the moon either, so, the Chinese Chang'e mission did, but the US and the Western countries haven't been there. I hope there aren't any surprises in store.
I'm sure their surprises maybe is not as interesting as one may think. They're probably the surprises that we find are interesting, where it's like, oh, okay. But everyone else is like, yeah. This all goes back, right? It was the Chandrayaan-1 mission that really showed unequivocally there was ice on the moon. And, with that founding of ice, and therefore there could be stuff that we can use for fuel and as a base, that changed the narrative of the moon. And I think we have to give credit to the ISRO, the Indian Science Research Organization, who built that, went out there to map the moon and showed something that changed our view of the moon. And I think it's exciting to think that we're going to find some of those. We're going to have a few more of those moments where a view of the moon is just upended. And that's a cool thing. Like, that is a great thing, especially with how much study and investigation and monitoring and understanding of the moon we've done, and now we're going to take that next leap. And so, the Artemis is not just about sending humans back to the moon. I think it is continuing our journey, and as it's talked about a lot, and we're going to hear in the broadcast tonight, getting onwards to Mars. But not even Mars is the goal, right? Because if you could do Mars and let's go explore moons of Jupiter and Saturn, all of this is now changed. And so it's a really amazing idea to think that, we did get stagnant a bit, I think, in the space world. A lot of people point to it. What are the goals? what are the overdriving outcomes you want it, and now we kind of know that and we have that vision. I think that's a really cool thing.
We are just minutes away from the launch of Artemis, hopefully, or at least the launch window opening for us as we pre-record ahead of tonight's coverage. Very much looking forward to it. Glenn Nagel's standing by as well to talk to us about the Australian contribution in terms of communication. Brad, you and I are going to be back next week for our monthly wrap of all things Talkin' Science. That, of course, I think is going to be dominated by what happens tonight.
It will be. There will be a capsule, hopefully nearish the moon by next week. We'll see how close to the moon it is, but that's the exciting thing, you're right, is that this is going to be the story. I mean, everyone is talking about it. And I think that's the great thing is it's reinvigorated. We've seen this new resurgence in space, especially here in Australia with companies coming online to launch rockets, build satellites, that sort of thing. And so the space world is, a lot of people say, is it like the 60s and 70s? No, I think it's much better than the 60s and 70s. I think it's much bigger. It's much more exciting. And, today, kids watching, thinking, will be able to do these things. It won't be, I remember as a kid 50 years ago or 40 years ago seeing it. I never saw the moon landing. I wasn't alive, right? So I think we're looking forward to having much more of these momentous events regularly happening into the future that, we just didn't really have in the past 50 years. And the only times that we did, unfortunately, were tragedies. That was the only time really, people clued into it. Now it's not going to be about, we only talk about it when there's these big tragedies, but when all these big successes, and it'll be, oh, that happened. Oh, that was last year, and so on and so on. I think this is the cool thing about it.
Absolutely, Brad. Well, plenty more Talkin' Science content for us to be had with these Artemis missions and so much more. Cannot wait for the launch tonight, and I will see you next week for more Talkin' Science.
Sounds good.
Yes, absolutely. We can only hope that coverage of launch will actually happen. We are still in that unplanned hold at T-minus 40 minutes. The last update from NASA was 35 minutes ago in regards to the hydrogen team of the SLS rocket, discussing plans with the launch director as to how to proceed. At this point, we have no further information. We are in that unplanned hold, and the media channel that we are taking our coverage from is just cycling through those amazing shots there on the ground at Cape Canaveral. I am hoping that very, very soon we will see the launch, or at least a resumption of the countdown. I remember from the coverage of Equatorial Launch Australia's sounding rockets from the Northern Territory, that constant hold at 3 minutes to go. Hopefully that's not the case here. This is a human-rated spacecraft. It's the first time that such a human-created machine is heading back to the moon since Apollo 17, 50 years ago, December 1972. I wasn't alive then. I wasn't alive for any of the Apollo missions. So this is absolutely incredible. It is surreal. I didn't think that I would ever be at this point in my life to be able to bring this coverage to you live from my very own YouTube channel. I didn't even think at the end of the shuttle program that we would have the ability to live stream such monumental events. I am very much looking forward to everything that is to come, especially here in the Australian space industry as well. It is going to be a very, very exciting time. Southern Launch are next up for launches. They're going to be launching. Launch window actually opens in the next few hours. I think it is, at least in the next couple of days, for a sounding rocket at the Canaveral test range. They have the license to launch 2 rockets from the Whalers Way orbital facility as well. So certainly some very exciting times. An update just in from NASA. Let me read that to you while I bring you those live shots from the Cape. And the launch is currently in an unplanned hold as the team works on an issue with engine number 3 on the core stage. Operations commentary is continuing over on the NASA live stream. For now, we are just continuing with me filling the airtime and keeping you up to date so you're not missing a thing. You can always, of course, check out that NASA stream, but I'd love for you to stick around with me, maybe catch me in the future as well. You are not going to miss a moment. I have everything covered here on the screens, so you will not miss a moment. Let's pick up the other pre-record now. Glenn Nagel from the Deep Space Communication Complex in work involving receiving stations at Goldstone, Madrid and Canberra. Pick up the baton to keep mission control in contact. Didn't press the right button, did I? Let me come back to me. Let me pick up Glenn. And once again, that question is, at what point does the Deep Space Communication Network pick up the baton to keep mission control in contact? Glenn.
So not long after launch, actually, initially the TDRS satellite network, the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System, will be doing communications with the launch vehicle. And not long after separation, about 72 minutes after launch, we'll actually have the first contact, initial acquisition of signal here at the Canberra station.
Very, very cool. So Canberra's first up.
Yeah, so we're first off the rank on that one with contact with the Orion spacecraft as it's starting out. It's going to be an interesting one because it's not going to be very high above our local horizon. So we have about a 15-minute pass to get in lock with the spacecraft and make sure that it's okay. And then, of course, just with the trajectory of the spacecraft and the ongoing rotation of the Earth, it'll actually be our antennas over in Madrid, Spain, which will continue the communication path.
So we're going to have issues like the dish. We've talked about the dish over the years that we've gotten to know each other. We're going to have to drop that right onto the concrete in the car park to acquire the signal.
Pretty much, yeah. We've got a better chance, I think, than maybe back in the 60s, though. Our technology is that much better. And, the concrete's a little bit further away.
I love it. Now, this flight is really a chance to bed in all the procedures that I'm sure have been years in the making. Even without a crew on board, how busy are you going to be there at Tidbinbilla?
It's going to be non-stop pretty much for 42 days throughout the entire course of the mission. So from not long after launch and vehicle separation through to a number of mid-course corrections the spacecraft will need to do on its journey to the moon. There's also the deployment of all the CubeSats being carried by the interstage on the Space Launch System rocket. They'll deploy and we'll be communicating with all of them throughout their journey to the moon. Wow. And none of them are guaranteed. They're kind of like high risk, high value CubeSats. So it'll be best everybody can do on that. And of course, right throughout its orbital time around the moon, that big swing outwards, taking the spacecraft further away than any human-rated spacecraft has ever been from the Earth before returning home and for that splashdown in the Pacific in early October.
Now, the next question that I had was what complexities does having a crew aboard? But I mean, we've got CubeSats here, all of these extra signals that are going to be acquired as they are launched. So I guess in general, these complexities of Artemis I and moving forward with crew on board, I guess in terms of human, there's a little bit more. We've talked about that in the past about wanting to be a little bit more signal accurate with the humans on there. Are we sort of there as well with those CubeSats, as you say, high value, high reward?
Yes, yeah, we've had to do a lot to practice on these CubeSats. We do a lot of simulations using emulated signals from the Jet Propulsion Labs to simulate what those CubeSats will be like and go through any number of scenarios of things that could go wrong, if we lose communication and so forth, what you do to recover the signals from those little vehicles. And most of them are only sort of the size of a small briefcase. They're tiny little things, microwave oven sized spacecraft. So it's going to be interesting to do, at 400,000 kilometers away from the Earth communication. But we've done similar before with the Marco A and B spacecraft that accompanied a mission to Mars in the past, particularly the the Mars Perseverance rover during its landing.
Now, NASA wants to stay on the moon as part of the legacy of Artemis. I'm guessing that's going to be a massive change in operations for the comms network as well. How's it going to affect the workload of the antenna?
So there's always this increasing need for higher rates of communication. The spectrum that we use right now on different frequencies is getting noisier around the world. So the Deep Space Network has to move into higher and higher frequencies, and that actually helps you to increase data rates. So most specifically for Artemis, we've been starting the process of installing on our 34-metre antennas here, the 34-metre antennas, and we're doing this at the other stations around the world, what we call near-Earth K-band communications. So this is a frequency specifically set that's going to be used in that K-band frequencies up in the high sort of 30, 35 gigahertz range to be able to communicate with the Artemis missions, and then for ongoing communications as we do more exploration on the surface of the moon. But ultimately, I think we're going to find that the Deep Space Network will sort of be overtaken in terms of communication as they establish a base on the moon, do more and more in lunar orbit on the Gateway Station, and just that continued flotilla of spacecraft that are planning to go there over the years. We're going to have to actually establish a communication network in orbit around the moon. So having sort of its own satellite network system, and probably using laser communications, because the data rate demands will be so high when you're operating a scientific base on the moon. You're not just having a couple of astronauts talk. You might be wanting to send back huge volumes of scientific data that you've collected, analysis of soil and rock. You might be even doing astronomical observations from the surface of the moon. So that's going to be really high volumes of information. So getting that back to different ground stations, not only the optical capacity that we're building into the Deep Space Network, but other potential facilities around the world.
What kind of data is going to be transmitted on, say, Artemis II with the crew, Artemis III with landing on the moon, putting these humans in the spacecraft? What extra does that add to the mission?
So there will be a lot more video communication, obviously. We'll be wanting to see all the activities of the astronauts live. There certainly will be cameras on this first mission, and we just various shots of the mannequin on board, I suspect, and some of the zero-G indicators, things like Shaun the Sheep that's actually on board as a zero-G indicator. So I'm sure there'll be those random shots. But once you put a crew on board, you're going to want continuous communication. You'll want video communication. There'll be data coming back from biomedical sensors on the astronauts' bodies. You'll have a lot more information coming about the life support systems on the spacecraft. So whenever you put humans on board, it's that extra level of complexity. And of course, all of that also requires an additional level of encryption, most especially for that personal information, the biomedical data. It's a matter of privacy for the astronauts. So that data we get through will have a level of encryption so that only the appropriate people who need to see that information can actually see it. But all the voice communication, of course, with the astronauts, same as we did back in the Apollo days, and the extra care that we will take ensuring that they get there and back.
What's the feeling like down there as we get ever closer to liftoff? I'm assuming there's no one still around from the Apollo days, so new territory for everyone?
Not quite, but there's been sort of quite a few of our alumni, some of those people who were working around the time of Apollo, calling in, checking in, see how we're going, how are you going to do the communication, and explaining to them all the changes that have happened in the communication technology over the decades since we first sent humans to the surface of the moon. It's not quite as seedy of pants anymore as it was in those times. So the technology is that much better, but it doesn't change the level of risk. It doesn't change the level of overall complexity. It's still not a simple thing to do to make these calls, even across a short distance like from the Earth to the moon. So the level of excitement here is pretty high at the moment. Lots of interest, of course, both from media and from the public. So that's been keeping us busy there, just answering all their questions. But for the teams themselves, I think it's a matter of pride. We always want to make sure that we do our job 100%, absolutely as perfect as it can be, so that we're transparent in all of these missions. So you don't even realize, you're just seeing the pretty pictures or data coming from the moon and the happy science teams back on Earth. So the Deep Space Network continues to be that sort of, invisible set of unsung heroes that do this work every day. But I think for us, probably it's going to be just that history-making moment again. That launch for Artemis I, seeing it on its journey to the moon, getting to the moon and splashing down again, and then getting ready for Artemis II and III, and then the ongoing program to explore the moon. I always think it's a wonderful thing that I can look out my office window here and look at the very dish that actually received and broadcast to the world those first images of Armstrong stepping onto the surface of the moon. You know, I was that wide-eyed 8-year-old watching that all happen, never thinking that, you know, more than 50 years later, you know, I'd be sitting here now getting ready to watch that next mission head off to the moon, and then for the follow-up missions to send people back again. And I wonder about all those little boys and girls out there, and those, you know, wide-eyed children, and the amazement that they'll have, you know, seeing those images again. And I'd love to think it could come through Canberra again. That would just be the icing on the cake.
It absolutely would. And having said, you know, in my intro to this coverage, 50 years since Apollo 17, the last time that humanity was on another surface, or another planetary surface, another body. That's what I'm trying to say. The moon's not a planet. But the last time that we were doing that. But Tidbinbilla and the Deep Space Communication Network as well are not inexperienced with this. So many missions in the interim. Now we're getting back to the very, very exciting stuff. We did mention that Tidbinbilla will be prime receiving station from the very beginning of acquisition of signal. I'm assuming that throughout all of these days ahead, there's going to be many more hours where Tidbinbilla is the prime receiving station as well.
Yes, so it's going to be, well, with our colleagues at our sister stations in Spain and in the United States, the Deep Space Network will provide that 24/7 coverage throughout this very first journey to return, you know, humans back to the moon. I'm really excited about it. I'll be staying up. It's going to be a very long day, I know, and a very long night. Let's hoping that it all actually is going really, really well. And I sort of recommend to people, you know, just make sure that when you're watching all this stuff and the coverage that you're producing there, Matt, and all of the stuff that NASA will be putting out and the European Space Agency and others, that they just remember there's that little connection here in their own backyard in Canberra, just outside the nation's capital, to keep that communication going. And it's going to be a pretty intense 42 days. I'm sure not quite as intense as it'll be for the crew over at NASA, though.
Absolutely, yes. NASA's coverage, including music and rock acts, and we're just kind of here in the Trekzone studio having a chat between our science friends. But it's just as good, and across Trekzone's social media as well. And I've just had a brainwave as to what is the next. As the PA continues there at Tidbinbilla, you are busy people. Looking at the next coverage, humanity's return to the moon. We probably need to head down and be in person down in Tidbinbilla, Australia's part of this mission. Very exciting times ahead, Glenn. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for that, and we'll talk again real soon.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Have a great night.
I love chatting to Glenn. It is an absolute thrill every time he beams in to Trekzone for a chat. Dr. Brad as well, the people that I get to chat with here on the show is an absolute thrill for me. The dopamine hit, if you will. We're the little YouTube channel that can. We have the quality of my 18 years of broadcast experience, bringing it to you on a YouTube channel in ways that hopefully more and more people are finding. Live once again to our coverage and that live stream from NASA. Unfortunately, we are still sitting in that T-minus 40-minute hold. Engine number 3 on the core stage is presenting problems now, so things aren't necessarily going the way that we want them to, which is a little bit unfortunate. Right now, I am going to, the benefits of being a one-man band, I just have to be looking at my screen here, unfortunately, as I am talking to you. I'm going to take you to some content from the NASA media channel. Earlier in the day, these little mini documentaries about Artemis's journey from then to now, from its announcement to its construction and to its final place there on 39B, Launchpad 39B. Let's take you now to these little mini NASA documentaries, and hopefully we will have some more information. I will, of course, break in with our graphic there on the bottom of the screen with the latest information, and if it is big news, I will come back to you live. Right now, though, let's enjoy this little documentary from NASA. That didn't quite play properly. It's kind of gone and broken everything. Let me try this once again.
NASA is preparing for a journey back to the moon, and after that, we're setting our sights on Mars. To get there, we need tons of rocket power coming from our Space Launch System.
When it comes to how much power this thing can push out, this thing is massive.
It's going to be mesmerizing to stand next to this massive vehicle. The immensity of it, knowing that this thing is going to be propelling a rocket into space and around the moon.
Hang on, it's probably best to start back at the beginning. It all started in Promontory, Utah, where Northrop Grumman manufactured each of the segments that make up the rocket's boosters. After a 10-day cross-country journey, the booster segments were delivered to Kennedy Space Center's Rotation, Processing, and Surge Facility, or RPSF. If this all sounds familiar, that's because it's the same facility that was used to process shuttle booster segments, which all came from Utah. Then they're ready to go to the iconic Vehicle Assembly Building, or VAB, where the rest of the motor segments are assembled and stacked on top of the mobile launcher.
So the one thing about this vehicle, of course, it's produced all across the country. Components all come here. They may be built around the country, but they all come together right here in the Vehicle Assembly Building.
Our SLS rocket will generate 8.8 million pounds of thrust to break through Earth's gravitational pull. That's more power than the Space Shuttle and the Saturn V rocket used. Teams with NASA's Exploration Ground Systems are responsible for assembling the boosters that will house the majority of that power. The twin solid rocket boosters, made up of 10 total motor segments, will stand nearly 17 stories when fully stacked. First, teams will inspect and prep the hardware. Next, they're ready to start stacking the segments, a process that takes time, patience, and a steady hand.
Once we have everything done in High Bay 4, we pick up the segment with the 325 crane, pick it up over the 16th floor crossover to where you see it now, and we begin stacking the segments. Each segment we lift over the 16th floor crossover and stack it. Once we stack it, we put it on top of the segment below, and we put about 177 pins all the way around the whole thing to attach each segment.
And the pressure to perform the operation flawlessly can test the team's nerves.
There's a tremendous responsibility involved with processing flight hardware like this. It's nerve-wracking at times, but it's exciting. There's zero appetite for risk in a program like this.
We have a bunch of shuttle guys that are here to show us along the way. You know, if we get stuck, they're there to guide us. At the beginning of the stacking, it was very nerve-wracking. You know, with each segment that we stacked, a little bit of the nerve comes off. By the third or fourth one, it's easy peasy. You know, we're pushing through, all the jitters are gone, and we're just excited to get finished with it.
With all 10 booster segments now fully stacked on the mobile launcher, there's just one final piece of the puzzle to round out the power needed to get SLS off the ground and send it to space. Core stage. After a 900-mile journey aboard NASA's Pegasus barge, the SLS core stage, the largest rocket stage NASA has ever built, has made it to Kennedy Space Center.
Today is a huge day. This is the last piece of big hardware that we need for Artemis I processing. And we've just been waiting a long time for this part of the vehicle to arrive so that we can get going on the next steps of our stacking operations.
Standing an impressive 212 feet tall and weighing a whopping 188,000 pounds, the core stage came all the way from Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. The core stage went through round after round of rigorous testing, including what's called its Green Run series, truly putting its performance to the test. The series involved 8 rounds that looked at systems individually before culminating in pure power. With over 700,000 gallons of propellant flowing through the core stage and its RS-25 engines firing for 8 minutes straight, the successful final test resulted in some big emotions from the team.
We cried, we laughed, and we cheered because it was so emotional to see, the years of culmination coming through.
And that victory did not come without overcoming a few challenges, proving why at NASA we test as frequently and as hard as we do.
And we got to shut down. All personnel.
So we actually did a 1-minute test on the first hot fire test, and then we learned a lot from that. We understood the vehicle more, we made a few changes, and then we got back into our second hot fire test.
There was a lot of joy and workmanship and ownership of being able to work that process and be able to get it done. When we went for the second hot fire and we went for the 500 seconds, that was just pure exhilaration.
Following its arrival at Kennedy, teams moved the core stage into the VAB, where it was lifted by a crane and placed in between the twin solid rocket boosters. Serving as the backbone of the rocket, the core stage will provide more than 2 million pounds of thrust to help send the Orion spacecraft on its trip around the moon.
Essentially, we have these 2 massive cranes that are located inside of the VAB, where we go ahead and we pick 2 points at the end of the core stage, one on the back portion of it and on the front portion of it. We lift it up to the point where we're able to transition it from a horizontal position over into a vertical position, and then essentially bring it way up to the top of the vehicle assembly building and cross it over into high bay 3, in which we ensure that we don't damage any part of the vehicle as it's incoming into its position.
NASA's largest rocket stage, now fully integrated with the twin boosters, is ready to get Orion off the Earth. But it will take one more critical component to give the capsule that extra push it needs to journey tens of thousands of miles beyond the moon. With just a single RL-10 engine, the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS, will provide over 20,000 pounds of thrust to send Orion on the ride of a lifetime. To connect the ICPS with the rocket stack, teams next added the launch vehicle stage adapter to the core stage, followed by the ICPS.
The ICPS is the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, and essentially it's somewhat of the upper stage of the entire SLS vehicle. And what that will do is propel the Orion capsule along with its service module over to its destination, which at this point in time will be the moon.
But before the spacecraft can be attached to the rocket, teams will conduct a series of tests to ensure all of SLS's components communicate properly with one another, plus the ground systems equipment, the launch control systems, and its software. Adding to the challenge, those methods for testing have changed significantly since the days of the Apollo program. Initially built in the 1960s to house assembly of the Saturn V, the VAB has undergone some major modifications to support several different kinds of rockets and spacecraft, whether they're going into low Earth orbit or venturing to deep space.
This high bay was shuttle heritage. Before that it was Apollo heritage. So there's upgrades that are still occurring today to include upgrades that will support Artemis II and Artemis III.
When SLS blasts off from Kennedy's Launch Pad 39B, Orion isn't the only thing it will be sending to space. Hitching a ride with Orion are tiny shoebox-sized satellites called CubeSats that were loaded into the Orion stage adapter.
That audio. And we will bring you that documentary once again on our next coverage, but it has been confirmed now that the launch of Artemis I for today has been scrubbed after the engineering team were unable to get past the engine bleed test on the number 3 engine of the core stage. The launch director has called a scrub for today. The next potential date for launch is September 2nd around midday US Eastern Time. At the moment though, there are quite a few processes to go through to be ready for another launch attempt. I'm going to keep you up to date on everything. Let's definitely take that live shot from the Cape. It is sitting poised and ready, and for a moment there I thought there was a shuttle attached to that. That is the imagery that is in my mind. Unfortunately, we have a no-go for launch today, which is very disappointing, but is out of an abundance of caution. We definitely want Artemis I to reach the moon and come back safely. The only way to do that is to be safe and to get these engine bleeds under control, have good weather for flight as well. And of course, Trekzone will be bringing you all the very latest as it happens on Talkin' Science. Dr. Brad will be back next Tuesday to keep us up to date, or to bring us up to date on everything that is happening. That's our monthly wrap of Talkin' Science. I won't have a Talkin' Science edition for you tomorrow. This is this week's show. But I will have more information across our social media channels as we learn more from NASA as to what's happened. And of course, we will go live once again on September 2nd if the engineers can get that engine sorted out. Fingers crossed that definitely happens. Unfortunate end to today's stream, but it is time for this young fella to head to bed. It is just about 20 to 11 p.m. here in Brisbane. We've got some pretty exciting stuff coming up for you on Trekzone. Be on the lookout for that. If you are a Trekkie, get subscribed because I've got our Star Trek Las Vegas coverage, which is Creation's 56-year mission tour. 7 great podcasts to come. Looking forward to bringing you those. Dr. Brad Tucker next week for Talkin' Science. A new Trekzone Plays edition series will be kicking off in a few weeks after our Vegas coverage. So plenty of stuff to come. I really appreciate your company this evening. We don't do big numbers around here, but we certainly do enough. And it's a very cool hobby of mine. So if you have friends that don't know about me, invite them to like, follow and subscribe to Trekzone across Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and of course here on YouTube. If you want to thank me for this video, that would be greatly appreciated. It's the one-time contribution offering here on YouTube. Click thanks below this video on every Trekzone video as well. That's a one-time donation. If you feel like joining the channel and helping me on a regular occasion, I have one membership level. It's at $3.99 Australian a month for that. So click join on below the videos, below Trekzone videos, to become a Trekzone member. And also 2 one-off donations if you don't want to go through the YouTube platform. I also have PayPal. That's thetrek.zone/PayPal. Jump on there, give us a donation, and that's going to contribute to the massive 20th anniversary edition of the channel next July. Looking forward to all of that. Looking forward to seeing Artemis I fly. These are live pictures from the Cape on NASA's media channel. They are wrapping up the coverage as well. There is nothing further to talk about today. Launch director has scrubbed the mission due to an abundance of caution following an uncontrolled bleed on the number 3 engine of the SLS core stage. An unfortunate end, but it is the way that it is. This is rocket science. It is not meant to be easy. For Trekzone, I am Matt Miller. Thanks so much for your company. I will see you again very, very soon.